Hello, and thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you and share about MWEEP. This is truly an organization and a mission that is very near and dear to my heart. When we first started this, it was a very small idea, but we found that the need was very great. And it forced us to think bigger and bigger. So I am happy now to share with you Maasai Women's Education and Empowerment Program. So when we started looking at this, MWEEP seemed a very odd and difficult to say acronym, but we simply could not improve on the idea of the mission of this organization. So to this day, we are still MWEEP. So Nairobi, Kenya is a thriving metropolis of a city with tall buildings and highways, and 2 hours drive away from Nairobi in the Gong Hills and the Rift Valley of Africa is where we met the Maasai. So yes, I was just saying at the beginning about the awkwardness of MWEEP, but we decided we could not really improve. And here's a first picture of just so close. When you're in this kind of a surrounding, you can't believe that just 2 hours away, you're in a bustling metropolis. And here is the typical home out in the bush, the mud and dung huts, and laundry on the outside. And this is a picture of the inside. This is a kitchen. And you see the woman is sitting very close to the fire. That's where they do all of their cooking. And there is a hole up in the ceiling for the smoke to escape. This is a grandmother who is sitting and making jewelry. The Maasai women are well known for the jewelry. And you can see not only is she making jewelry, but she is wearing a considerable amount of jewelry. So the Maasai tribe is a very proud patriarchal society. And the men are judged, their wealth is judged by the number of wives and children and cattle they have. So because of this, girls are usually not sent to school beyond just the primary grades, because once a woman is married, she's part of the husband's family. So her family doesn't really want to invest money to educate someone who is not going to be part of their family once she's married. So for many, many years, the tradition was as early as the age of 14, young girls were part of arranged marriages and cattle was exchanged. And the marriage then helped her family when she went to her husband's family. But there were a group of women in the Gong Hills that began to see the outside world. And they all came together and said, we want a different life for our daughters. And that's how MWEEP began. It was actually the women in Kenya, the MWEEP Kenya women, who came up with the name Maasai Women's Education and Empowerment Program, because it was their belief that it was only through education that they would be able to change their society and to change lives of their daughters. So I was part of a group that visited Tanzania and Kenya in 2009 and had the privilege of visiting one of the schools where MWEEP was helping young girls attend. This is Kamuka Girls School. It does not look like, I'm sure, your idea of a boarding school. This is one of the women working at the school is preparing the midday meal. There are 3 meals a day provided for the girls that attend, and all the meals look and taste pretty much the same. Here are the girls lined up for lunch. And this is one of the rooms in the dormitory. There are 25 bunks per room, 50 young girls. And at the end of each of the beds is a very small little box. And that's where all of their personal possessions are inside that box. This is a classroom. Again, very crowded. Note the absence of any kind of instructional material on the walls. It is pretty bare bones education. This is part of our group. The teachers that were there were very excited to have us come and visit, and they asked if we would speak to one of the classes and encourage the girls to work hard and to stay in school. And so that's exactly what each of the 4 of us, you can see, each of us shared some of our life stories. And behind us, you can see the chalkboard. And obviously that was the science lesson for the day. There's often, that is the extent. They don't have a lot of textbooks. Now, this was in 2009. And so as more and more girls are going to school, they are improving the education that the girls are getting, and they're getting more of the educational materials that they need for their classes. I had the opportunity then of visiting with some of the girls who were being supported by MWEEP, and each one of them were just extremely grateful and said that they could not be there if we hadn't helped support them, because their families simply couldn't afford to send them to school. After our visit, then we met with some of the Maasai women, some of the MWEEP Kenya women, and told them how proud we were of the work that they were doing, and the fact that they actually made this decision to change their culture, which is something that takes a lot of courage. And they were all willing to do that. Every single person there was willing to step up and step out of the box that they grew up in. This is one of the young women. Each woman stepped forward and talked about how MWEEP has changed their life, the difference that it made not only to them personally, but to the fact that now they knew that they were going to be able to send their daughters to school. So on the left, you see Rosemary. Rosemary was one and is still part of MWEEP Kenya, but she was one of the founding members of MWEEP Kenya and was so excited about being able to send girls to school. And she was always sharing and talking about how education truly changes lives. So here's a picture of some of the girls that are excited about going to school, and they are all talking about the amazing things that have happened. One of the things that was pretty obvious right at the beginning was how drastically education reduces child marriage, because the families for the first time have an option. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't love their daughters and didn't want to send them to school, but they simply didn't have the resources. And so they were very appreciative of the fact that now they did have a choice and they could send their girls to school. And of course, then once the girls go to school, their whole world opens up to a new way of thinking, that there are other options for them and for their lives. And the fact that they are valued enough to be sent to school gives the girls such a sense of respect, and to feel like she is respected and valued in her families because they're willing to send them to school. Part of the statistics that they look at when girls begin to be educated is that obviously one of the first things is that you don't have those very early pregnancies. You can imagine a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl's body is not completely developed yet, and yet becoming pregnant. The incidence of death for girls and the babies was really quite high. And so being able to postpone that for several years has been a great benefit to all of the young girls. This is a group of, of girls. One of our board members, Pat O'Rourke, went on a trip and visited. And these are girls that are just beginning like their first year of secondary school. And she asked them, what are you going to do with your life? And they all started shouting, more school, more and more school. So they knew that it wasn't just taking secondary, which would be like going to high school, that wasn't the end, that there were more things that they wanted to do. And then they could see how education would empower them and give them rights that they didn't have before. It was not uncommon for women to not be able to own property. Women never had their own money. The men were very dominant in this society, and they were the ones that had all of the rights to land, and they made all the monetary decisions. And so the fact that now they could have a job and have their own money, this was a brand new look at life for them. Education creates leaders. One of the first things that we found was that all of a sudden the women, the MWEEP Kenya women, had status in the village, and they were beginning to be looked at by others as leaders instead of always just being in the kitchen. And it certainly, they found that education improves a girl's future of learning, and this is only the years of secondary school would be in their future earnings by 10 to 20%. But the girls also learned how important it was to feed their families carefully and to think of nutrition. When they were looking at planting vegetable gardens, and one of the things that they learned was how valuable and how nutritious eggs were. And so one of the women even started raising chickens and selling eggs. So it has a huge impact on their own lives and also on the lives of their children. educated mothers educate their children. And the more educated the mother is, the greater the chance is that the girls will go even further in school. So these young women are all excited and celebrating with a young girl who has just completed her secondary education. This is Josephine Sepper. Josephine has one of the most remarkable stories. When we first began MWEEP, Josephine wrote us a letter, and she said that she was very blessed because at birth, she had a defect on one of her feet. And she said because of that, that made her unmarriageable. And so her family sent her to school because they couldn't get any cattle for her in an arranged marriage. So they sent her to school. But because of MWEEP, we were able to help Josephine go to secondary school, and she became an accountant. She took many years of accounting. And part of what she does then is that she is still the accountant for MWEEP, and she's the one that sends reports. And you can see in this pink folder on the right, that was how Josephine started off keeping her records. And she recorded the names of all of the women that came to their MWEEP Kenya meetings. And you'll see some of them have kind of little blue blobs. And that's because the women that came were illiterate and were not able to sign their names. So Rosemary went from a notebook with handwritten lists and signatures. Today, I get Excel spreadsheets from Josephine. And the spreadsheet shows every single girl that goes to school. It shows what school she goes to. It shows exactly the check amount and number that's sent to that school. It is an amazing step to see how Josephine has grown in these last few years with the support and help of MWEEP. She has been an integral part of the success of MWEEP. MWEEP Kenya is all volunteers. The women there, many of them travel many kilometers from their homes to the town. It's a small town of Gong where they have their meetings. And we do send, when we send wires to Kenya, we have certain areas that are designated. And one of the things that we do cover are their operating expenses, because these women have bank fees and they have computer fees. We rent them an office. The office rent is $25 a month. And we cover that out of the funds that we send them. But none of them have an income or a salary from MWEEP. And the same is true of MWEEP USA. And so the bottom picture then shows the MWEEP USA board, but sadly it is not a current picture because just this summer, we lost 2 of our board members. The person standing on my left in this picture is Liz Drew, and she passed away in early summer. She was also part of the founding board that started MWEEP. And when you first begin an organization, you have ups and downs, and some days you sit and look at each other and say, is this really going to work? But Liz never doubted. When we would say, are we going to do it? Are we going to have enough money to send these girls next year? Liz's response was always, yes, we made a commitment to these girls and we will see that they go to school. And then standing in the back on my right in this picture is Sue Edwards. Sue is not a founding board member, but right from the very beginning, she happened to be a neighbor and she came to fundraisers that I had on my back deck, and Sue was there. So right from the beginning, she was a very valued supporter of MWEEP, and then several years ago joined the board. And she will also be sorely missed for her enthusiasm and commitment to this organization. So I am very sad that we lost two of our board members. Neither one was COVID related. One of the things that Sue especially always wanted to be sure that everyone knew and understood is that 90% of all of the funds raised go to Kenya to support education. And I think that has been a goal that we started right from the beginning, and we have felt very committed to that. So when we have our board meetings, we don't have a great deal of overhead. We sit around my kitchen table and in Paulsbo, and that's where we have our meetings. But we have been very blessed to have supporters that have seen to it that we were able to keep going year after year. One of the early, right from the very beginning, one of the early philosophies was cost share. So none of the girls that go to school have a free ride. Every family of a girl that goes to school has to contribute something to the education of the girls. We try to send all of our money, the MWEEP Kenya women send it directly to the schools. The money does not go to the families, but they are expected to have uniforms, as you can see, and the families are usually asked to provide the uniforms. It's rather difficult to say explicitly how much each girl gets to go to school, because MWEEP Kenya does it on a need basis. So some girls may get more support for school than others, but that of course is the value of having MWEEP Kenya there, because they know the girls, they know the families, they know what their circumstances are. And we felt like if the family is invested in the girl going to school, then they are going to be more supportive of her, and then that allows her to be more successful. So we've been really pleased that our cost share has been able to work very seamlessly for us. The other part of our philosophy that we thought of here, but in fact did not have to impose on MWEEP Kenya, was giving back, because this is a basic part of the Maasai tribe, is that they are very conscious of helping one another. And so in this picture on your left is Susan, and MWEEP helped send Susan to school and to secondary school. And now Susan is, no, I'm sorry, Susan is the young girl in the uniform. Josephine, this is a different Josephine, is the girl that we supported. And she is a patron then of Susan. And so she contacts her to be sure that she has everything she needs for school. And if she needs any counseling, or if she has any questions, she knows that she can go to Josephine for support. Once we started completing, the young girls started completing secondary school, I mentioned Josephine right away, wanted to go to post-secondary school. And so it didn't take very many years, not long at all, really, for us to find that as soon as a girl finished her 4 years of secondary, that she was interested in continuing her education. And so we also support girls then that go to colleges and universities. Many of the girls go to vocational schools, computer schools. Some of them learn dressmaking, just whatever vocation they are looking for as far as their career choices go, then we try to help support them with those classes as well. So now these young girls, remember the mud and dung hut that I showed earlier? So someone who grew up there could now possibly be a teacher, an accountant in the Ministry of Health. They're doing medical training, all kinds of businesses, computers, hairdressing. Community leadership is one of the things that we are so pleased with, because we feel like that is really where the empowerment comes in, because these women now are for the first time being looked at as leaders in their community, and people are going to them with questions and looking for their opinion and their support on projects. So an educated girl's impact is exponential. If you stop and think about women in your lives and how a mother, a sister, an aunt, a grandmother, how that person impacted your life, and how many more people it impacts. And each day it grows and grows. So you think that you might be helping one person, but the influence that that one person has obviously makes a huge difference. So in 2018, we had our first major milestone in MWEEP, and we celebrated 10 years. And we looked back at all of the girls that had gone to school. And in 2019, the milestone that we hit was providing 1,000 years of school. And it's something that to this day, sitting around the kitchen table, we look at one another and we think, wow, how did that happen? It happened because of that last picture that you saw of how educated women impact the world. It's one of those things that it's not something we ever would have guessed we would be able to do when we were looking at this in 2006 and 7. This year in 2020, I almost hesitate to say the name 2020, but at the beginning of the year, we had 93 girls in secondary school and 33 in post-secondary. So often we have donors who say, what does it cost to send a girl to school? And as I mentioned before, with our cost share philosophy, it is hard for us to say specifically how much one girl would receive. But for our budgeting purposes, we plan on $300 per year to send a girl to secondary school, and then $600 for post-secondary. And of course, this varies widely. If you have someone who is learning how to use a sewing machine and start her business, the amount that she receives is much different from a young girl who wants to go to university. And again, none of these scholarships cover the full amount. Families are still asked to support the girls one way or another. But sometimes in people in donating, they would like to say, I want to cover a year of school. And so that's why we have our $300 and $600 budgeted estimates. There are, our fundraising has changed over the years. As I've alluded to earlier, we started off with little dinners and luncheons in our homes. And then several years ago, when Kitsap Great Give came along, that was a great opportunity for us to really expand our fundraiser. So we have been part of Kitsap Great Give for the last several years, and it has had a huge impact on how many girls we're able to support. In the fall, we have, for the last 5 or 6 years, we have had a jewel box theater buyout. So we buy the all of the seats in the theater for one performance. It's usually been a Sunday afternoon. In the fall, when they first begin their series of performances, we have a small little auction in the lobby, and where we have several items for visitors, for our guests to bid on. And then we provide wine and hors d'oeuvres while they're doing that. Of course, this year that fundraiser had to be canceled because of the pandemic and the closure of theaters. We do, MWEEP is one of the recognized charities for Amazon Smile. So if you shop on Amazon and you go to smile.amazon.com, you can select Maasai women. I don't believe it's listed under MWEEP, but if you go to Maasai women, then pennies on the dollar come to us, but pennies add up and can be a great help. And so we really appreciate that. And then finally, at the end of the year, just about a week ago, I sent out our annual solicitation letter at the very end of the year. And so that those are the 3 main fundraisers that we have throughout the year. We feel like education is what gives these girls hope. And when they have hope, then they can look at change. And when we first started, we had donation envelopes that we passed out, and we call them the gift of hope, because we truly feel that that is what education is for these girls, for their mothers, for their families. It gives them that ray of hope that allows them to make changes, to leave poverty behind, and change their own life and the lives of people around them. On the left, you'll see a small gathering. Again, there were 8 of us when we first started. And then, because of the tenacity of the women on the right, those women in Kenya who said, we want to make a difference, they were not afraid to ask for help. They were not afraid to break out of tradition. And because of that, we feel like that's what allowed us to provide 1,000 years of school. I still think that is such an amazing number. And Margaret Mead has this quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And that has been something that has been a reminder to us, because I often think, especially in today's world, but even 10, 11 years ago when we were looking at this, and you look at the enormity of a problem, and it makes you think, I'm too small. I can't do anything about that. But that really isn't true. We can make changes. And when we are kind and thoughtful and willing to share, changes can be made that last forever. So if anyone would be interested in contributing, I think earlier it was mentioned on, we have a website, MaasaiWomen.org. Our mail is MWEEP2020@gmail.com, or you could mail checks to our post office box 1958 in Silverdale, Washington. So at this time, if anyone has any questions, I'm ready.
Oh, thank you very much, Barbara Stark, for a wonderful presentation. And there's some questions that I'm going to read to you now.
Okay.
The first, there's several questions having to do with the language that you teach in. And we assume that it is English. And then we wonder how the how the kids get acclimated to English or learn enough to be in your classes.
So I believe that English is taught very early when they first start going to school in what they call their primary schools. And because there are a lot of different dialects, Kiswahili is the native language of Maasai. So many of them speak Kiswahili. But the women in the particular village where we have MWEEP Kenya, their language is Ma. And I was amazed when I went to visit at how good their English was. I would assume that the language taught in their schools is Kiswahili, but I honestly can't tell you for sure.
Do you mean it's Kiswahili for the schools that you are supporting?
Yes, yes.
So they're not being taught in English?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. What kind of, when you speak about a post-secondary, what does that entail?
So the post-secondary school, or those are where the girls have decided on career choices. If they want to go into business, or if they want to become lawyers, whether they want to go to a college or a university for those kinds of careers, or if they want to do vocational classes where they learn hairdressing or dressmaking or something of that sort, then they can take those vocational kinds of schools or
So
classes.
It's not really what we might think of as university. It's different from that.
Yes, yes.
First of all, is this just for girls? Are the schools just for girls? You do not do any teaching of boys?
The girls that go to boarding school, the secondary schools, which is basically high school, those are all girls, yes. When they go to university, of course, then you have men and boys in those schools.
Oh, I meant the schools that you support. You're supporting only girls, as I understand it.
Okay, I need to make that clear then. We don't support any one particular school.
Mhm.
the girls can go to any school that they choose. So they generally will find a school closest to where they live.
Mhm.
So we simply send money to the schools that cover the girls' fee. But we don't personally have schools.
That's interesting because all the pictures you showed in the classroom were all girls. That's why I think it was
Yes,
confusing.
and because those were all secondary. That's all
Oh,
high school and that's the boarding school. So yeah, those were all girls.
what subjects are taught in the pre-secondary? You know, the ones that you're talking about that are the ones that not the post-secondary.
Right.
Oh,
Those would be those,
just secondary.
yeah, the secondary schools. So those would be your general education classes. They have math and reading, history, they have science. It's just your basic general education, like what our students get when they go to high school.
So they get a full range. They get trigonometry and
I,
and all
I,
that.
I am not positive about that because again, it probably depends on the school where they attend. Um, you know, how qualified, what qualifications their teachers have.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because it would be very difficult in the things that you showed with the blackboard and all that to do very many complicated post-secondary.
Right,
So
right.
it seemed to be too difficult. Someone else asked, the names seem to be Western that you refer to, like Susan and this. Is that typical that instead of having a name or their native language, they all have English?
Yes, I was also very surprised at that. Yes, all of the girls that we support seem to have Western names that we recognize.
Do you think they were born with those names or that they got them that way when they got
I,
the scholarship?
I believe they were. I believe those are their given names.
Mm.
However, here's one interesting thing that shows how strong their patriarchal tradition is, because there was one student whose name was listed as Peter Saduki. And so I contacted Josephine and I said, Peter is usually a boy's name, and we are assuming that all of our students are girls. And she said, oh, she hasn't yet learned to use her name. She's registered under her father's name.
Oh, okay.
So again, the lack of value, um, I found that really interesting.
Well, then this is a question towards that. Has there been any backlash from the men and boys as the basic culture shifts to the more educated girls who are educated?
Yeah.
Up to,
Um,
and the person also said, has there been an uptick in domestic violence toward those
oh,
girls?
excellent question. In fact, when we were planning our trip, I was a little concerned about that myself, wondering how are we going to be received by the fathers? We know the mothers are going to be very welcoming, and but how are we going to be received by the fathers? And I did not meet one single male that was not totally 100% committed to this program, because they could see, it's you guys will love this, because one of the terms that the WEEP women use is the enlightened men. The enlightened men saw the value of an educated woman, and they were just very, very excited to think that their daughters had a chance at becoming educated. And some of the women said first, too, they didn't know if they would ever get married because the men were used to having uneducated wives. And what they found was, again, enlightened men loved and were excited about having an educated wife. So they have embraced it as well.
That's very interesting. And there's a little add-on that someone has put in here, is that did you go into the communities and interact with them to encourage this kind of change, or did that happen automatically, or did you do any community education?
Yeah. I think that that is the reason that MWEEP has been successful. It's because it came from the Maasai women. It was their idea. They're the ones that said, we want to make a change. We didn't come in as the enlightened Americans shaking our finger and saying, this is not good, you need to change. I'm not sure that change would ever have occurred if we'd gone in with that attitude. But I think because this was something that they wanted, I think that's what made the difference there.
And there's another interesting question here. From how many villages do the girls or women that you support come from?
So again, it's difficult to be specific about that because our concept of a village is a group of housing that you can see one house to another or within a certain sightline distance. But a village there is more of an area. And so it's difficult. Most of those areas don't really even have names. It's just they're my village and people know where that is. And so the girls go to school. They try to go as close as they possibly can to where they live. Even though they're there 24 hours, the cost of transportation can be prohibitive. And we might have girls in as many as 25, 35 different schools. So they don't all go to one school. Again, they're able to choose a school that is the most convenient and the least expensive for them.
Barbara, I don't see any more questions here. And I think that it's been wonderful. I'm going to turn it over now to Karen Leader-Scott.
All right, thank you. And thank you so much for letting me come and share with you tonight.
Barbara, we really thank you so much for coming tonight and speaking. It was very interesting and very well done. Thank you. We also thank everyone who attended tonight and encourage you to join us again on December 11th. Thank you, and thanks to the library staff, Jose and Priya, who are with us, and thanks to the Enlightened Board. So we're going to sign off and say good night. Thanks so much.